The crystalline spires of Vorthak Prime trembled as Admiral Kethvar received the transmission that would shatter his species' thousand-year reign of terror. His serpentine form coiled around the obsidian command throne, 6 eyes fixed on the holographic display showing impossible sensor readings. "This cannot be accurate," he hissed, his voice echoing through the war chamber where lesser Vorthaki officers cowered. "Run the scan again." Commander Yixtal's mandibles clicked nervously as she manipulated the controls. "The readings are confirmed, my lord. A single vessel, approaching from the Rim territories. Mass, approximately 2 million tons. Energy, signatures unlike anything in our databases." Kethvar's claws scraped against stone. For a millennium, the Vorthaki Empire had crushed every species that dared oppose them. Their bioweapons had sterilized hundreds of worlds. Their torture fleets had broken the will of entire civilizations, and their slave armies had marched across half the galaxy. No single ship had ever posed a threat to their armadas. "What of the Terran colonies we pacified?" Kethvar's voice carried the satisfaction of remembered slaughter. 3 months ago, they had discovered a cluster of primitive human settlements in the Outer Rim. The massacre had been exquisite. Entire families dissolved in acid baths, while the survivors were forced to watch. Children turned into living weapons through genetic manipulation. Cities burned while evacuation ships were hunted for sport. All 17 colonies were eliminated as ordered, my lord. No survivors. But the approaching vessel bore human signatures. Across the galaxy, in the darkened bridge of the Terran vessel Nemesis, Captain Dexandra Vo stood motionless before the tactical display. Her coal-black eyes reflected the red glow of weapon, systems that had never been tested in anger, only in simulation. Behind her, the bridge crew worked in absolute silence. Humans, yes, but not quite the same species that had once populated those Rim colonies. "Status report," she said, her voice carrying an otherworldly resonance. "Target acquired, Captain," reported Lieutenant Nixara, her fingers dancing across controls that pulsed with bioluminescent energy. "Vorthaki home system, 43 inhabited. World's estimated population of 600 billion. Weapon systems? The convergence array is fully charged. All secondary systems nominal." Dexandra nodded slowly. 3 months ago, she had been Dr. Alexandra Voss, leading xenoarchaeologist studying artifacts on Kepler 442b. Then the Vorthaki came, and everything changed, not just for her, but for humanity itself. The survivors of the Rim colonies, all, 47,000 of them, had been given a choice by the entities they'd awakened in their desperation. Transcend or perish. They chose transcendence, trading their purely human nature for something far more dangerous. "Open a channel to Vorthak Prime," Dexandra commanded. The massive view screen flickered to life, showing Admiral Kethvar's horrific visage, his serpentine features twisted in what might have been amusement. "Ah, humans," he purred. "Come to avenge your pathetic colonies. I remember the screams of your younglings as we remember." Dexandra interrupted, her voice cutting through space-time itself. "We remember everything, every child, every scream, every moment of suffering you inflicted upon our people." Kethvar's amusement faltered as he truly looked at her, at the impossible geometry of her form, at the way space seemed to bend around her presence. What are you?" Dexandra smiled and reality shuddered. "We are what humanity becomes. When you murder our children," the Vorthaki war fleet assembled with desperate efficiency. 300 dreadnoughts, each the size of a city, bristling with weapons that had cracked moons and boiled atmospheres. Behind them, 10,000 lesser vessels formed attack formations that had conquered star systems. Admiral Kethvar watched from his flagship Torment of Worlds, his 6 eyes tracking the lone human vessel as it approached with impossible calm. Despite his growing unease, he felt a familiar thrill, The humans had transcended somehow, yes, but transcendence meant nothing against overwhelming firepower. "All ships, target the human vessel," he commanded. "I want it vaporized before it can—" The space around the nemesis suddenly folded. Reality twisted as the human ship seemed to exist in multiple locations simultaneously. The Vorthaki sensors shrieked in protest as they tried to track a target that occupied 17 different spatial coordinates at once. "Fire!" Kethvar roared. The combined might of the Vorthaki armada unleashed itself. Particle beams that could slice through planetary cores, quantum torpedoes that collapsed matter into singular points, bioweapons that turned living tissue into screaming acid. The barrage was enough to sterilize a solar system. It passed harmlessly through the nemesis, as if the ship existed in a different dimension entirely. Aboard the human vessel, Captain Dex Andra felt the attacks as gentle breezes against her. Consciousness. The transcendence had changed them all, yes, but it had not made them gods. It had made them something far more terrifying. Humans with the power to enforce their will upon the universe itself. "Nixara, begin the demonstration." "Yes, Captain." The lieutenant's enhanced fingers moved across her console, and space-time responded to her touch like clay in the hands of a sculptor. The outermost Vorthaki planet, a manufacturing world of 40 billion souls, simply ceased. Not destroyed, not vaporized. It had never existed. The shockwave of impossible terror rippled through the Vorthaki fleet as their sensors confirmed what their minds refused to accept. An entire world wiped from history itself. No debris, no energy discharge, no trace that it had ever been. "You want to know what we are?" Dexandra's voice reached every ship in the system simultaneously, bypassing all communication barriers. "We are the children of the species you tried to extinct. We are the answer to your cruelty." A second planet vanished. Commander Yixtal's mandibles clicked in panic. "My lord, they're not destroying the worlds, they're editing them out of existence. Our quantum archives show no record of those planets ever having formed." Kethvar's serpentine body coiled tighter around his throne. In all his campaigns of conquest, he had never faced an enemy that could rewrite reality itself. The humans weren't just fighting them. They were making it so the Vorthaki Empire had never possessed those worlds to begin with. "All ships, full retreat. Contact the core worlds, tell them." A third planet disappeared, along with its 12 orbital defense platforms and the 3 million Vorthaki military personnel stationed there. "Tell them what?" Dexandra's voice carried the echo of 47,000 murdered colonists. "That the species you dismissed as primitives has returned? That the children whose screams you savored are now rewriting the laws of physics themselves?" The human ship began to move through the system with deliberate slowness, passing between the cowering Vorthaki vessels like a predator among prey. With each passing moment, another piece of the Vorthaki presence simply ceased to have ever existed. "We gave you everything," Dexandra continued, her words carrying across dimensions. "Our trust, our peace, our children's laughter. And you answered with torture and death. A fourth world vanished. Now we give you understanding." The emergency session of the Vorthaki High Council convened in the deepest bunkers of their homeworld, 3 kilometers beneath the planet's crystalline surface. 12 of the most ancient and terrible beings in the galaxy gathered around the pulsing neural web that had coordinated their species' atrocities for millennia. Supreme Overlord Vexthara, eldest of their kind at over 8 centuries, extended her consciousness into the collective network. Her mental voice carried the weight of eons. "Show me these transcended humans." The neural web displayed the tactical recordings from Admiral Kethvar's fleet. 12 planets simply gone. Not destroyed, erased from the timeline itself. The Vorthaki archives now showed that their empire had never claimed those worlds, had never even discovered them. "Impossible!" hissed Counselor Mordak, his biomechanical implants sparking with agitation. No species can manipulate causality on such a scale. The energy requirements alone would— His words died as the bunker's quantum sensors detected an impossible signature. The human ship Nemesis had appeared in orbit above Vorthak Prime, having somehow bypassed every defense grid, every early warning system, every barrier between the outer rim and their sacred homeworld. Supreme Overlord Vexithara felt something she had not experienced in 8 centuries: fear. Aboard the Nemesis, Captain Dex Andra stood in what had once been the ship's bridge, but was now something beyond physical architecture. The Transcendents had changed not just their bodies and minds, but their very understanding of what it meant to exist. The bridge existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously, allowing her crew to perceive and manipulate reality from angles that 3-dimensional beings couldn't even conceptualize. "Captain," reported Lieutenant Nixara, her form now more energy than matter, "we're detecting deep bunker communications on the homeworld. The High Council is in session." Good. They should witness what comes next. Technical Specialist Voron, who had once been a simple engineer named David Kim, looked up from his multi-dimensional console. "The convergence array is fully calibrated, Captain. We can begin the final phase at your command." Dexandra nodded slowly. The Transcendents had come at a terrible price. They were no longer entirely human. They existed partially outside normal. Space-time, their consciousness spread across multiple reality layers. They would never again know simple human pleasures: the taste of food, the warmth of sunlight, the touch of a loved one. They were living weapons now, shaped by grief and powered by the need for justice. But they remembered. They remembered being human. "Before we proceed," she said to her crew, "I want each of you to recall why we chose this path. Remember Maria Santos, age 7, who wanted to be a xenobiologist. Remember Robert Chen, who composed music for alien frequencies. Remember Sarah Okonkwo, who taught Vorthaki prisoners to read human poetry before they—" Her voice trailed off, but every member of her crew felt the shared memory. The torture chambers, the slow dissolution of human bodies in acid baths while families were forced to watch. The children converted into living weapons, their minds shattered and rebuilt as instruments of war. "We could have chosen simple revenge," Dexandra continued. "We could have become monsters. Instead, we chose justice. Perfect, terrible, necessary justice." Far below, Supreme Overlord Vexithara felt the weight of cosmic attention focusing on her homeworld. The humans were not hiding their presence. They wanted the Vorthaki to understand exactly what was about to happen. "Open communications," she commanded. "I will speak with their leader." The neural web connected to the human ship, and Vexithara found herself face-to-face with Captain Dexandra's transcended form. The human appeared as shifting geometries of light and shadow, beautiful and terrible in ways that made the ancient Vorthaki's mind recoil. "So," Vexithara said, drawing upon 8 centuries of imperial arrogance, "you have come to bargain for your species." Dexandra's laugh echoed across multiple dimensions. "No," she said. "We have come to teach." The lesson began with the 13th moon of Vorthak Prime. Gavritos had been converted into a training facility where young Vorthaki learned the arts of psychological warfare. Here, captured specimens from conquered species were kept alive for educational purposes. Living examples of how to break different types of minds, how to extract maximum suffering from various physiologies, how to turn empathy into a weapon against itself. Captain Dexandra's consciousness touched the moon's surface, and she felt every scream that had ever echoed through its torture chambers. 47,000 human colonists had died on 17 worlds, but millions of beings from dozens of species had suffered in facilities like this one. "Nixara," she said softly, "initiate selective temporal reversion." The lieutenants transcended. Form pulsed with bioluminescent calculations. Targeting torture victims, Captain. Temporal coordinates locked on the moment before each subject's capture. What happened next defied every law of physics the Vorthaki thought they understood. On Gavritos, the screams stopped. Not because the suffering ended, but because it had never begun. One by one, the tortured beings simply weren't there anymore. They had been returned to their home worlds, to the moments before Vorthaki raiders had captured them. But the Vorthaki torturers remained, suddenly finding themselves alone in empty chambers designed for inflicting agony. Supreme Overlord Vexithara watched from her bunker as similar reversals occurred across 17 different worlds simultaneously. Not destruction, liberation. The victims saved, the perpetrators left to contemplate their empty implements of cruelty. This is impossible, she whispered into the neural web. The energy requirements to manipulate causality across multiple star systems? You keep thinking in terms of energy, Dexandra's voice responded, somehow intercepting their private communications. But we don't use energy anymore. We use will, and our will is forged from the screams of children you tortured to death. Technical. Specialist Voron's fingers danced across controls that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously. Captain, the liberation protocols are cascading. We're detecting temporal echoes across 43 systems. Let them cascade, Dexandra replied. Every being they've tortured, every innocent they've destroyed, all of them are being written back into history at the moment before their suffering began. The Vorthaki High Council felt their empire dissolving around them, not through conquest or rebellion, but through the systematic reversal of their greatest victories. Worlds they had depopulated were suddenly full of life again. Species they had driven to extinction were thriving in restored ecosystems. The very foundation of their 1,000-year reign was being edited out of existence, but they remained. The perpetrators, the architects of genocide, the engineers of systematic cruelty, they were left untouched, watching as everything they had built simply ceased to have happened. You could kill us, Vexithara said, her ancient voice carrying a note of desperate cunning. But instead you choose this elaborate humiliation. Why? Dexandra's form shifted, and for a moment the Vorthaki Supreme Overlord saw her as she had been. Dr. Alexandra Voss, xenoarchaeologist, mother of 2, lover of ancient poetry and alien music. Then the transcended version reasserted itself, terrible in its perfect composure. Because death would be mercy, she said, and you showed no mercy to our children. Lieutenant Nixara looked up from her console, her enhanced awareness tracking probability cascades across multiple timeline branches. Captain, we're approaching the critical threshold. The convergence array is ready for final implementation. What is the convergence array? Vexithara demanded, though part of her already knew she didn't want to hear the answer. Dexandra smiled and space-time rippled around the expression. It's how we ensure you never hurt anyone ever again. The human ship began to pulse with energies that existed beyond the electromagnetic spectrum. On every world where the Vorthaki had inflicted suffering, reality began to adjust itself, not changing what had happened, but changing what could happen. You see, Dexandra explained as cosmic forces gathered around the nemesis, we've learned something important about the nature of consciousness and causality. It's possible to create what you might call a behavioral event horizon, a line beyond which certain actions become not just impossible, but literally inconceivable. The Vorthaki High Council felt it beginning, a strange numbness in their minds, where certain thoughts used to be. The concepts of torture, of deliberate cruelty, of taking pleasure in another being's suffering. They were becoming difficult to grasp, like trying to remember a dream upon waking. What are you doing to us? Mordak's voice carried the first notes of genuine terror. We're teaching you to be better than you are, Dexandra replied. whether you want to learn or not. The convergence array activated with the sound of 47,000 voices singing in harmony, the restored echoes of every human child who had died in the Vorthaki genocide. Their song rippled through dimensions that mathematics had no names for, reshaping the fundamental nature of aggressive consciousness throughout the galaxy. Captain Dexandra felt the wave pass through her transcended form, carrying with it the accumulated weight of justice made manifest. Around her, the bridge crew of the Nemesis stood as living conduits for forces that would redefine what it meant to choose cruelty over compassion. Implementation at 60%. Reported Lieutenant. Nixara, her consciousness stretched across 17-dimensional matrices simultaneously, neural pathway restructuring proceeding within acceptable parameters. Technical specialist Voran monitored the cascade effects with instruments that existed partially outside normal space-time. Captain, we're detecting resistance from the Vorthaki High Council. Their neural webs are attempting to reinforce aggressive behavioral patterns. Let them try, Dexandra said softly. The universe itself has decided they're wrong. 3 kilometers beneath Vorthak Prime's surface, Supreme Overlord Vexathara writhed in her command throne as alien concepts invaded her consciousness. For 8 centuries, she had taken exquisite pleasure in the suffering of lesser species. Now, when she tried to recall that satisfaction, she found only emptiness. The neural pathways that had once fired with sadistic joy were being systematically rewritten. "Fight it!" she commanded the other council members through the neural web. "We are the Vorthaki! We are the apex predators of this galaxy! We will not be unmade by primitive!" Her words dissolved into confused silence as she found herself unable to complete the thought. The concept of primitive, when applied to the transcended humans, had become literally unthinkable. Her mind simply couldn't form the neural patterns necessary to maintain that delusion. Counselor Mordak's biomechanical implants sparked and failed as they attempted to process impossible inputs. "My lord, I can't remember why we wanted to hurt them. The humans, the other species, when I try to recall the pleasure we took in their pain, there's nothing there." "Because," came Dexandra's voice, somehow speaking from within their own neural web, "that pleasure was never real. It was a symptom of damaged minds, and now we're healing you." The convergence array reached full implementation, and across the galaxy, something fundamental shifted. On every world where the Vorthaki maintained military forces, weapons designed for torture simply forgot how to function. Not broken, they had never been designed for that purpose. Soldiers who had specialized in psychological warfare found themselves unable to remember their training, unable to conceive of deliberate cruelty as a viable tactic. But it wasn't just the Vorthaki. Lieutenant Nixara's enhanced perception tracked the wave as it spread beyond the target species, touching every corner of galactic civilization. "Captain, the effect is propagating faster than projected. We're seeing behavioral modifications in 17 other aggressive species. The Ketani slaver networks just stopped," reported Voran with wonder in his transcended voice. "Their entire infrastructure is shutting down because they can no longer conceptualize owning another sentient being. The Murdoch corporate wars have ended," added communications specialist Zevran, monitoring subspace chatter across multiple sectors. "Both sides are laying down arms. They literally can't remember what they were fighting about." Dexandra nodded slowly. This had been their true purpose, not just to punish the Vorthaki, but to ensure that the cycle of violence that had claimed their colonies could never repeat itself anywhere in the galaxy. "Implementation complete, Captain," Nixara announced. "The convergence array has successfully installed empathic behavioral limiters in approximately 400 billion sentient minds across 47 star systems." Supreme Overlord Vexathara felt the last of her ancient cruelty drain away like water from a broken vessel. In its place came something she had never experienced in 8 centuries of existence. Genuine remorse. "What have you done to us?" she whispered, though the question now carried sorrow rather than rage. "We've given you the gift our children never received," Dexandra replied, her transcended form beginning to shift towards something that looked almost human again. "We've given you the chance to be better than you were. For the first time in their species' recorded history, the Vorthaki High Council fell silent, not from fear or calculation, but from the overwhelming weight of understanding exactly how much suffering they had caused and how utterly meaningless it had all been. And in that silence, something new began to grow. 6 months after the convergence, the galaxy bore little resemblance to its former self. The great slave markets of the Rim worlds had transformed into refugee assistance centers. Former Vorthaki torture specialists worked alongside their previous victims, using their intimate knowledge of suffering to heal rather than inflict. The bioweapons laboratories had become research facilities dedicated to restoration and enhancement of life. Captain Dexandra walked through the memorial gardens on what had once been Vorthak Prime's most feared military installation. Here, where Vorthaki officers had once trained in the art of psychological warfare, monuments now stood to every species that had suffered under the Empire's reign. Former torturers tended these gardens with meticulous care, their transformed minds finding peace in nurturing growth rather than cultivating death. She was no longer entirely the transcended being she had become in the depths of grief and rage. The convergence array had changed her too, softening some of the cosmic alienation that had come with transcendence. She could still perceive multiple dimensions, still manipulate causality when necessary, but she could also taste food again, feel sunlight, experience something approaching normal human emotions. "Captain Voss?" The voice belonged to Kethvar, the former admiral who had overseen the genocide of the human colonies. He approached hesitantly, his serpentine form somehow less intimidating than it had been months ago. "Just Dexandra now," she corrected gently. "We don't need military ranks for what we're building here." Kethvar's 6 eyes showed an emotion that would have been impossible before the convergence. Shame. I needed to show you something. The memorial. Committee has finished the documentation project." He led her to a crystalline structure at the garden's heart, where holographic displays showed the faces and names of every being who had died under Vorthaki rule over the past millennium. The display cycled through millions of entries. Children, elders, artists, philosophers, farmers, engineers, each life precious, each death unnecessary. "We remember them all now," Kethvar said, his voice breaking. "Before the convergence, they were just numbers, statistics in our victory records. But now we see them as they were. We feel the weight of every lost song, every unfinished dream, every moment of love that was stolen from the universe." Dexandra nodded, watching the faces cycle past. Among them were the colonists from her former life, including her own research team from Kepler 442b. Dr. Michael Torres, who had discovered the artifacts that eventually led to humanity's transcendence. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who had translated the first of the ancient texts, her graduate students so young and eager to understand the universe. "The question now," she said, "is what we do with that weight." "We've established the restoration protocols," Kethvar replied, gesturing to displays showing reconstruction efforts across 43 star systems. "Former military assets are being converted to assist refugee populations. Our bioweapons technology is being adapted to heal environmental damage. Every Vorthaki who participated in what we did has volunteered for the rehabilitation programs." It was true. The convergence array hadn't just prevented future cruelty, it had instilled an overwhelming need to repair past damage. Former Vorthaki warriors now worked 18-hour days in refugee camps, driven by a compulsive need to atone for their previous actions. And the other species? Dexandra asked. Similar transformations across the board. The Katani have disbanded. They're slaver networks and are working to reunite separated families. The corporate wars have ended, with both sides redirecting their resources toward humanitarian aid. Even species we never directly affected are reporting decreased aggression and increased cooperative behaviors. Lieutenant Nixara approached. From across the garden, her form now stabilized in primarily human appearance, though she still occasionally flickered through multiple dimensions when concentrating. Captain? Dexandra. We're receiving the first reports from the Deep Survey missions. The Deep Surveys were expeditions to explore the galaxy's uncharted regions, specifically looking for other aggressive species that might have escaped the convergence wave's effects. They were also searching for something else. Other transcended civilizations, other species that might have undergone similar transformations in their own struggles against extinction. What did they find? Nixara's expression was complex, mixing excitement with concern. The Andromeda contact. We've confirmed the signals are from an artificial source, highly advanced, possibly transcended like ourselves, and Dexandra. The mathematical structures embedded in their transmissions suggest they're extending an invitation. Dexandra felt a familiar mixture of anticipation and wariness. Humanity's transcendence had been born from trauma and the need for justice. They had used their new abilities to reshape local galactic civilization, but they had always known they were not alone in the universe. Other species had faced extinction. Other minds had been forced beyond normal limitations by desperation and necessity. Prepare the Nemesis for intergalactic travel, she said finally. But first, we complete the work here. The restoration protocols need another year before they're self-sustaining. Kethavar's transformed features showed something that might have been hope. You're staying? Even after everything we did to your people? Dexandra looked out across the memorial gardens, where former enemies worked side by side to build something beautiful from the ruins of their violent past. Our people chose transcendence, she replied. That means we chose responsibility, not just for punishing the guilty, but for nurturing what comes after punishment. She paused, watching a group of Vorthaki younglings playing with human children in one of the garden's educational areas. Besides, she added with the first genuine smile she'd worn in months, someone needs to make sure the next generation learns a better way. 1 year later, the Nemesis departed local space on a heading for the Andromeda Galaxy, carrying with it representatives from 17 species and the accumulated wisdom of the most successful rehabilitation program in galactic history. But Dexandra was not aboard. She stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Hope Station, orbiting the world that had once been the heart of the Vorthaki Empire and was now the center of the Galactic Restoration Council. Through the transparent aluminum windows, she watched her former ship disappear into folded space-time, carrying her transcended crew toward whatever awaited them in distant Andromeda. You could have gone with them, said Vexathera, approaching, with the careful gait of someone still learning to navigate the world without the armor of ancient cruelty. The former Supreme Overlord now served as Director of Memorial Services, dedicating her considerable intellect to ensuring that the lessons of the past were never forgotten. Someone has to tend the garden, Dexandra replied, gesturing toward the planet below, where cities were being rebuilt according to new principles. Architecture that celebrated life rather than dominance, technology designed to enhance rather than exploit, art that spoke to the possibility of redemption. Besides, she continued, I've learned something important about transcendence. It's not about becoming more than human, it's about becoming the best version of what human means. The observation deck's other occupant was Dr. Karavdin, who had once been the Vorthaki Empire's chief torturer and was now its leading researcher in psychological rehabilitation. His work with former victims had led to breakthroughs in treating trauma that were already being applied across dozens of worlds. "The integration protocols are showing remarkable success," he reported, his voice still carrying traces of the hiss that had once terrified prisoners, but now spoke only of dedicated professional concern. "Former victim populations are not just recovering, they're experiencing post-traumatic growth at unprecedented rates. Many are choosing to work directly with former perpetrators in the healing programs." Dexandra nodded. This had been the true miracle of the convergence, not just the prevention of future cruelty, but the emergence of genuine forgiveness and cooperation between former enemies. The galaxy was becoming something it had never been before, a place where beings from hundreds of species worked together not from necessity or fear, but from genuine care for each other's well-being. "Incoming transmission from the Andromeda mission," announced the station's AI, its voice warm with synthetic emotion. "Priority 1 from Lieutenant Nixara." The holographic display materialized, showing Nixara's transcended form against the backdrop of the Nemesis's bridge. Behind her, strange geometries of light suggested they had made contact with whatever intelligence had been sending signals from Andromeda. "Dexandra," Nixara's voice carried wonder and excitement. "You need to see this. We've made contact, and it's incredible. They're not just transcended. They're an entire civilization that chose to transcend together millions of years ago. They've been waiting for others to reach their level of development." "Are they like us?" Dexandra asked. Nixara's laugh sparkled across the dimensional barriers between galaxies. "They're better than us. They transcended not from trauma or the need for justice, but from pure curiosity and love. They want to share what they've learned, help us take the next step in our development." "And what is the next step?" "Not just healing one galaxy," Nixara replied, "but helping every galaxy heal itself. They've shown us the deep patterns, how consciousness and compassion can be cultivated across entire galactic clusters, how species can evolve beyond the need for conflict, not through force, but through understanding." Dexandra felt a familiar stirring in her transcended consciousness, the same feeling she'd experienced when first touching the alien artifacts that had enabled humanity's transformation. The universe was vast beyond imagination, filled with wonders and possibilities that no single species could explore alone. "How long before you return?" she asked. "The learning curve is extensive," Nixara admitted. "They're offering to teach us techniques that could take thousands of years to develop on our own. But Dexandra, when we come back, we'll bring knowledge that could transform not just our galaxy, but every galaxy we can reach." After the transmission ended, Dexandra stood in comfortable silence with her former enemies, watching the stars wheel slowly beyond the observation deck. The galaxy around them hummed with the sound of construction and growth, of species learning to trust each other, of former predators becoming protectors. "Do you ever regret it?" Vexathera asked quietly. "The transcendence? What you had to give, up to become what you are now?" Dexandra considered the question carefully. She thought of her original human form, of the simple pleasures she'd lost, of the academic life that had been destroyed along with the Rim colonies. Then she thought of the children playing in the memorial gardens below, growing up in a galaxy, where the strong protected the weak instead of preying upon them. "Ask me again in 1,000 years, she said finally, "when we see how far this garden has grown." As if in response to her words, the planet below pulsed with a gentle bioluminescent glow, the sign of another successful integration ceremony, where former enemies formally committed to working together for the benefit of all life. In the distance, barely visible against the star field, construction continued on the next phase of Hope Station, a massive facility designed to welcome and rehabilitate aggressive species from other galaxies, when and if they were ever encountered. Humanity had set out to save its own children and had ended up nurturing an entire galaxy towards something resembling wisdom. It was, Dexandra thought with deep satisfaction, Exactly the kind of impossible thing that humans were supposed to do. The horizon held infinite possibilities, and for the first time in her transcended existence, she was eager to see them all unfold.